This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on IMF's appreciation for Indian economy as a bright spot on global horizon. The participants are A.N. Jha, former Finance Secretary, and Ruchika Chitravanshi, journalist.
The International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, recently lauded India's economic growth and said that country deserves to be called a bright spot on an otherwise dark horizon. She said that even during these difficult times, it has been a fast-growing economy, but most importantly, she said, this growth is underpinned by structural reforms. Mr. Jha, what is your view of India in a global scenario right now? What are the effects of the global headwinds that the country is going to face? Can you take us through this?
The statement made by the IMF MD Managing Director is very, very significant because if you see the projections which the IMF had made a few days prior to this statement by the Managing Director, India still retains a fairly significantly higher growth rate compared to other similarly placed countries. In fact, the entire global economy has undergone a downward revision, and India is no exception in this. But the 6.8% growth rate which India is projected to have in FY23 is still amongst the highest globally. And the reason why the IMF MD seems to have made this is that the structural reforms which the government has undertaken ever since the pandemic broke out particularly is very, very important. One of the underpinnings of this structural reform is the entire emphasis on what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat program, which is underpinned by the PLI scheme, the Productivity Linked Incentive Scheme. There is a move towards reforming the power sector, which is a very critical area in the entire value chain of the economy. The corporate sector, particularly the rules governing the IBC, insolvency and bankruptcy code, etc., is being continuously looked at, fine-tuned, reformed, so that the corporate governance is improved in the country. The woes of the banking sector has been addressed both by the Reserve Bank of India as well as by the Government of India. Similarly, in insurance sector, the entire insurance sector has been opened up significantly. LIC, we have seen the public issue come out, which indicates the government's preference to divest in LIC. But what I would like to emphasize here is the emphasis which the IMF gave on digitalization of the economy, the use of technology, and how India has become a global leader and a global example. Now, a lot of these reforms which are there are enabled through digitalization, which started some years ago, and the significant success story there is the Jan Dhan Yojana, which has enlarged the entire access to the banking sector. I'll confine myself to the statement at the moment.
So you talked about all the structural reforms that we have taken from Atmanirbharta to the use of digitization and technology. Can you tell us a little bit about how the digitalization has added what has been its role in giving an impetus to our economy?
I would see the success of digitalization in three ways. The first is the access it has enabled for a largely untouched rural India to financial instruments and financial institutions. It started with the Jan Dhan Yojana, which expanded through the use of the UPI, Universal Payments Interface. It gradually got expanded post-demonetization because of the actions of the Government of India, the NPCI, the Reserve Bank of India, and the entire banking sector. It was also underpinned by the success of Aadhaar, the expansion of Aadhaar into an almost universal coverage of the population and the reach of the mobile telephony. So all these combined to provide the first thrust of digitalization. Of course, the private sector was keeping pace with technology globally, but to enable the last man in the country, the last point, the rural India in the country to access digitally the financial instruments and financial institutions has been one of the most remarkable achievements. Second list is the transfer of money from the government to the people for different schemes through what is called the DBT, direct benefit transfers. And that again has taken a couple of years to mature, but then it is again one of the biggest success stories in recent times, not only because of the size of the transfers that take place, but also the success rate of the transfers. The third important thing which is there is that the emphasis on digitalization has been continuously expanded through use of technology and better technology. And the best example of this is the coming of 5G technology in the country, which is fairly indigenous in its composition. And that will also expand the quality as well as the reach, digital economy and digital footprint for this large population.
How concerned are you about the weakening of rupee? I'm asking in the context because we're talking about growth prospects. And globally, there is a lot of concern around recession and how it is going to affect our economies. How insulated is India going to be from these things? So some of these macro factors, if you can talk about and their impact on Indian economy.
There is no doubt today that the global economy is in a lot of stress. One of the primary reasons for this is the very, very high inflation rates that are prevalent, particularly in Europe, Western Europe and United States. They are seeing the highest inflation rate in perhaps decades. The second challenge which we have is the war which is there in Ukraine, Russia, which has been now on for about 9 months. Third challenge, which again IMF has also pointed out, is the slowdown in the Chinese economy and the position which China has as a global supplier of various types of components and goods which are used for manufacturing in other parts of the world. So all these factors are there which are globally challenge for India. But the most significant is the increase in the interest rate by the United States to combat inflation. Now that has been sucking out investment from other parts of the world back into the United States, and which has had a ripple effect on all global currencies, including the rupee. Rupee has been depreciating, but at a much slower rate or a much smaller rate as compared to some other currencies of very large economies in the world. The point to make here is that the decline in the rupee has both a positive side and a negative side. The positive side is that the exports become competitive and India should be able to use this depreciation to its advantage in increasing its export base. The negative side is that the imports become costlier. But problem for India is that our imports are almost inelastic because of oil. The large share of oil in India's import bills is a very, very important factor for current account deficits which India has. And a declining rupee will create further challenges for managing both the fiscal side of the finances as well as the monetary side of the finances by the Reserve Bank. So it's a very, very challenging situation as it's emerging. The decline in oil prices in the last few months is a positive sign. It raises some optimism that if the oil plateaus out, maybe we should be able to combat the declining value of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. But I'm sure this is something which we'll have to keep a watch on. The IMF has flagged it in a big way in its report that the challenges of the advanced economies, US, Europe, and China, is going to have an impact on a lot of emerging economies, including India. So we have to be very watchful of this one.
What are the few things that Indian economy should focus on in like a short-term period over the next 2 years, let's say, to make the most of the global situation?
Some of the reforms which have been initiated are in the right direction, particularly on providing intensive investment opportunities, both the global investment companies as well as for our Indian companies through different interventions. As I mentioned earlier, the productivity-linked incentive scheme is one such thing. But the important thing for India as we go forward is to further ensure ease of doing business. The rules and regulations have to be calibrated in a manner which removes ambiguities and subjectivity so that investment flows can take place. A lot of investment globally is moving away from China, as we understand, and also investors are looking for areas there is relative ease of doing business. So we have to take further measures to ensure that this is one of the advantages which India can offer. Second, capital expenditure, which has received a lot of emphasis in the last 2 years, has to continue for some more time. The emphasis on capital expenditure has to focus on creation of infrastructure, particularly roads, railways, power. These are some of the areas which are requiring urgent attention. Urgent investment. This will have impact on employment as well as growth. The third area is income generation activities, particularly for rural India. We have Manrega. We have a lot of programs and schemes which are there which support income generating activities in rural India. We have seen the success story of self-help groups and different types of interventions that have taken place to promote self-employment in rural areas. These have to be continued, perhaps with renewed emphasis and use of digital technology in a bigger way than it has been in the past. The third, or rather the fourth important pillar in my view should be agriculture. Agriculture diversification is very, very critical. We are dependent a lot on oil seeds, import of oil seeds, import of pulses. Now, these are items on which we can easily diversify and make ourselves, if not self-sufficient, close to self-sufficient. So I would say that these should be the focus area of the policymakers.
You mentioned the rural economy, and one of the things that is working for India is that the rural demand has not died down and it is picking up. We have direct benefit transfer. What do you think of that scheme? Are there more changes? Are there some changes that you'd like to see in it? What has worked? What has not worked? What do you think of DBT?
My view, DBT has been a big success. The need now is to extend it to larger number of schemes and interventions. For example, the power subsidy which is given by the states is one area which needs to be addressed. The power reforms try to tackle this by suggesting that DBT should be the mode of transfer for power subsidy to agriculture consumers and other consumers who are getting the subsidy. So these newer areas where we need to have DBT. This will also reduce leakages. This will reduce the pressure on the fist of both the states as well as the central government.
I would also like your view on overall picture of the global economy and how concerned about a recession in India, because there was a recent survey of the CEOs where most of them said that they are expecting a mild and short recession. So in that context, how worried should we be when it comes to India, even though India is being called bright spot, which it has been called for many years now, that it is a bright spot?
A recession is certainly a prospect which is looming on the horizon. They have not formally called it out, but if you see the IMF report which has come out about a week back, that clearly indicates that the larger global economies, the United States, Western Europe, and China are going to stall. That means their growth rates are not likely to pick up quickly, indicating in a very indirect way that we may see a recession there. Now, a recession in any of these large economies will have a chain effect across the entire global economy, particularly emerging markets like India. But the bright spot for India, if you look at it, is the growth rate. We are likely to grow at 6.8 to 7%, thereabouts. It may be something more or less around this number, 7. The finance minister has also called out around 7% growth for next year. So this should provide us with the cushion to absorb the global shock because of the large size of our market, the large investments that have taken place. Our industry is vibrant. Our financial institutions are vibrant.
That is a very cautiously optimistic approach we have. And I think that is the way to go forward. And as you rightly pointed out, there is opportunities for India to invest more into infrastructure and to spur investment in upcoming companies. And obviously, you also mentioned the rural demand and the rural economy, and all the efforts that we have put to boost that as well will keep us in good stead. Thank you so much, Mr. Jha, for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on IMF's appreciation for Indian economy as a bright spot on global horizon. The participants were A.N. Jha, former Finance Secretary, and Ruchika Chitravanshi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official.